The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Military Base Commissary in North Carolina. Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her old pickup truck, wearing faded jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without makeup or uniform, she looked like any other woman in her late 30s running weekend errands. She had been looking forward to this quiet Saturday morning. After 3 weeks of intensive classified operations and debriefings, she just wanted to buy some groceries, grab a coffee, and enjoy a rare day off. The base was quieter on weekends, and she appreciated the peace. As Sarah walked toward the commissary entrance, she noticed a group of young Marines gathered near the coffee shop next door. Their voices carried across the parking lot, full of energy and confidence. She recognized the type immediately. Fresh, eager, proud of their service. She had been like that once, many years ago. One officer stood apart from the group. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his early 30s. His crisp uniform marked him as a captain. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the self-assured way he carried himself. There was nothing wrong with confidence, she thought. The Marines earned their pride. But sometimes, that confidence crossed into arrogance. Sarah paid them no mind as she walked past, focused on her simple mission of coffee and groceries. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice called out. She turned. The captain was walking toward her, a slight smirk on his face. His name tape read Brennan. Behind him, a few of his fellow Marines watched with amused grins. "Yes," Sarah replied politely. Captain Brennan looked her up and down, his expression showing barely concealed amusement. "This is a military commissary. You know you need military ID to shop here, right?" Sarah kept her face neutral. "I'm aware. Thank you. So, are you military, or are you here with your husband?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge of condescension to it. "I'm military," Sarah said simply. "Oh yeah?" Brennan's smirk widened. He glanced back at his friends, then turned to her again. "Well, we're supposed to render proper customs and courtesies. So, what's your rank?" He asked it like it was a joke, like he was humoring a child playing dress-up. Sarah studied him for a moment. She had dealt with this attitude before. Many times. In the early days, it had bothered her. It had made her angry. But after nearly 2 decades of service, after everything she had seen and done, it mostly just made her tired. "Major," she said quietly. The smile on Brennan's face faltered for just a second, but then returned. "Right. Sure. And what do you do, Major?" "Admin. Personnel." There it was. The assumption. Even when faced with the possibility that she might outrank him, he immediately assumed she must be in some support role. Something safe. Something appropriate for a woman, in his narrow view. "Special operations," Sarah replied, her voice still calm. Now Brennan laughed outright. "Okay, ma'am. Special operations. Look, I don't know who you're married to, but you should know that stolen valor is actually a crime. You can't just go around claiming ranks and—" "Captain Brennan," a new voice cut through the air like a knife. Everyone turned. A Marine colonel was walking toward them from the parking lot, his face stern. Sarah recognized him as Colonel Marcus Hayes, the base commander. She had briefed him just 2 days ago. Brennan's posture immediately snapped to attention. "Sir." Colonel Hayes walked past Brennan without even looking at him, stopping directly in front of Sarah. Then, to the shock of every Marine watching, he came to attention and rendered a sharp salute. "Major Mitchell," Hayes said with unmistakable respect. "I didn't know you were still on base. I thought you'd be on leave by now." Sarah returned the salute with practiced precision. "Good morning, Colonel. Just picking up a few things before I head out." "You've earned your rest," Hayes said. "That operation you led last month was exceptional." The commandant specifically mentioned you in his briefing to the Joint Chiefs. Just doing my job, sir, Sarah replied. Hayes nodded, then finally turned to look at Captain Brennan, whose face had gone pale. Captain, do you know who you're talking to? Sir, I didn't. Brennan stammered. This is Major Sarah Mitchell, Hayes said, his voice hard. Call sign, Elite. She's one of the most decorated special operations officers in the entire United States military. 2 silver stars, 4 bronze stars, and a Purple Heart. She's led more combat missions than you've had hot meals, Captain. The coffee cup in Brennan's hand began to tremble. Sarah could see the realization washing over his face, followed quickly by horror and embarrassment. Sir, I apologize, I didn't recognize, Brennan started. You didn't recognize her because she wasn't in uniform, Hayes interrupted. And because you made assumptions. Bad assumptions. He looked at Sarah. Major, I apologize for this officer's conduct. I assure you. Sarah held up a hand gently. It's all right, Colonel. No harm done. With respect, ma'am, there is harm done, Hayes said firmly. Accusing an officer of stolen valor is a serious matter. The parking lot had gone completely silent. More people had emerged from the commissary and coffee shop, drawn by the commotion. Everyone was watching now. Brennan's hand was shaking so badly that coffee began to slosh over the rim of his cup. He looked down at it, then back up at Sarah, his face a mask of mortification. The cup slipped from his fingers and hit the pavement, splashing coffee across his polished shoes. No one moved to help him. No one spoke. Sarah looked at the young captain, seeing not just his arrogance, but his youth. His inexperience. She remembered her own early days, the mistakes she had made, the lessons she had learned the hard way. Colonel Hayes, Sarah said calmly, I appreciate your support, but I think the captain understands the situation now. We all make mistakes. Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better than to contradict a senior officer's wishes, even in this situation. As you say, Major. He turned back to Brennan. Captain, you will report to my office at 0800 Monday morning. Clear. Yes, sir, Brennan managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Hayes saluted Sarah once more, then walked away, shaking his head. The crowd began to disperse, whispers spreading like wildfire. Sarah could imagine the story being told and retold throughout the base by evening. The cocky captain who challenged the legendary Major Elite. Sarah turned to leave, ready to finally get that coffee and forget this whole incident. Major, Brennan's voice stopped her. Ma'am, I'm sorry. There's no excuse for what I said. What I implied. I was completely out of line. Sarah turned back to face him. He stood there, coffee staining his uniform shoes, his friends having scattered, his pride thoroughly shattered. Apology accepted, Captain, she said. Can I ask? He hesitated. Why did you defend me to the colonel? I accused you of stolen valor. You could have ended my career right there. Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering another parking lot, many years ago, and another young officer who had made assumptions about her. She remembered the choice that officer had made, and how it had changed her life. Because, Captain Brennan, she finally said, the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's what they do after. You can learn from this, or you can let it destroy you. That choice is yours. She walked away then, leaving him standing in the parking lot with his spilled coffee and his shattered assumptions. What Sarah didn't tell him was that this encounter had brought back a flood of memories. Memories of the long, hard road that had led her to this moment. Memories of the people who had underestimated her. And memories of the ones who had believed in her when no one else would. As she finally entered the coffee shop, Sarah's mind drifted back to where it had all started. To a small recruiting office in Tennessee, 18 years ago, and to a young woman with a dream that everyone said was impossible. 18 years earlier, Sarah Mitchell had been a completely different person. At 20 years old, she stood in a recruiting office in her hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee, her heart pounding with determination and fear. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where most kids followed one of two paths: they either stayed and worked in the factories, or they left for college and never looked back. Sarah's family couldn't afford college, but she was determined to leave anyway. Determined to be more than what everyone expected. The Army recruiter, Sergeant First Class Williams, had looked at her paperwork with a frown. "Your test scores are excellent," he said. "Top marks in everything. You could go into intelligence, maybe communications." "I want infantry," Sarah said. Williams had actually laughed. "Ma'am, that's not possible. Women can't serve in infantry. It's not allowed." This was 2005. The combat exclusion policy was still in effect. Women couldn't officially serve in direct combat roles, even though everyone knew they were fighting and dying in Iraq and Afghanistan anyway. "Then what's the closest I can get?" Sarah had asked. Williams studied her for a long moment. "You could try for military police. They see combat. Or intelligence. Some of those positions deploy forward." Sarah had signed up that day for military police with a promise to herself: she would find a way to prove herself. To show that she belonged on the front lines just as much as any man. Basic training had been hard, but not in the ways she expected. The physical challenges were difficult but manageable. She was strong, fast, and determined. What was harder was the constant doubt from others. Drill sergeants questioned whether she would quit. Fellow soldiers assumed she was there to find a husband. Instructors gave her pitying looks when she volunteered for the toughest assignments. But Sarah never quit. Not when she was the only woman in her squad who passed the first ruck march. Not when a male soldier twice her size tried to intimidate her into dropping out. Not when she scored expert marksman on the rifle range and some of the men claimed she must have cheated. She graduated in the top 5% of her class. Her first deployment came in 2006. Iraq. She was assigned to a military police unit conducting convoy security and base protection. It was dangerous work, but Sarah wanted more. She wanted to be where the real action was. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A special forces team operating out of her base needed someone to help with intelligence gathering in local villages. They needed someone who could interact with Iraqi women, who wouldn't be allowed to speak with male soldiers. It was called a cultural support team role. Sarah volunteered immediately. Captain David Chen, the Special Forces team leader, had been skeptical at first. "This isn't convoy duty," he told her bluntly. "We're going into hostile territory. Taliban and Al-Qaeda operate in these areas. If something goes wrong, you'll need to fight your way out just like everyone else." "I understand, sir," Sarah had replied. "I'm ready." "We'll see," Chen said. That first mission had been terrifying. Sarah rode in a Humvee with the Special Forces team, her heart racing as they drove through narrow streets in a city that wanted them dead. Every window could hide a sniper. Every pile of trash could hide an IED. They reached the target house without incident. While the men secured the perimeter, Sarah went inside with the interpreter to speak with the women of the household. The intel they gathered that day led to the capture of a high-value target the following week. Chen had looked at Sarah differently after that. "You did good work," he told her. "Want to do it again?" She did it again. And again. And again. Over the next 2 years, Sarah deployed on dozens of missions with Special Forces teams. She learned to move like they moved, think like they thought. She learned combat medicine, advanced marksmanship, close-quarters battle tactics. The Special Forces soldiers taught her everything they could, impressed by her dedication and skill. One night, after a particularly intense mission that had ended in a firefight, Chen pulled her aside. "You're wasted in military police," he said. "Have you thought about going to officer candidate school?" I don't have a college degree, Sarah replied. You have battlefield experience and the respect of every Green Beret on this base. Trust me, that counts for more. There are programs. Ways to make it happen. Sarah had taken his advice. When her deployment ended, she applied for a special commissioning program. It took 2 years of night classes and correspondence courses while serving, but she earned her degree and her commission. In 2009, newly commissioned Second Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell reported to her first assignment as an officer, a military intelligence unit preparing to deploy to Afghanistan. She was 24 years old, and she had already seen more combat than most career soldiers. But she was still a woman in a military that didn't fully trust women in combat roles. Her new commander, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Price, made his feelings clear in their first meeting. I don't know what strings you pulled to get here, Mitchell, he said, but in my unit, you'll be working intelligence analysis. Behind a desk. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Sarah said, hiding her disappointment. For 6 months, she did exactly that. She sat behind a desk at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, analyzing reports, building target packages, and watching as male officers led the missions she had helped plan. It was soul-crushing. Then came the night that changed everything. A mission went wrong. A team had been sent to capture a Taliban commander, but they had walked into an ambush. 3 soldiers were wounded, pinned down in a compound with insurgents closing in from all sides. Sarah was in the operations center when the call for help came through. She watched on the drone feed as the situation deteriorated. The quick reaction force was 20 minutes out. The soldiers didn't have 20 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Price was trying to coordinate the response, but he was struggling. He didn't know the terrain like Sarah did. She had studied every inch of that area, built intelligence reports on every building. Sir, Sarah spoke up. There's a route. Southwest corner of the compound. It leads to an alley that connects to the main road. The QRF could approach from that direction, flank the insurgents. Price barely looked at her. We're working on it, Lieutenant. Sir, with respect, I know this area. I've mapped every. I said we're working on it. Price snapped. Sarah watched the screen, her jaw clenched. The soldiers were running out of ammunition. One of the wounded wasn't moving anymore. She made a decision that could have ended her career. Sarah stood up, walked to the radio, and broadcast directly to the Quick Reaction Force commander, Captain James Rodriguez. Viper 6, this is Overwatch 2. I have a route for you. Southwest corner, coordinates to follow. It will put you behind the enemy position. There was a pause. Then Rodriguez's voice came back. Overwatch 2, send it. Sarah read out the coordinates and directions, her voice steady despite the rage radiating from Lieutenant Colonel Price. You're relieved. Price shouted at her. Get out of my operations center. Sarah didn't move. Sir, those soldiers need. I said get out. Sarah left, her hands shaking with anger and fear. She had just committed insubordination in front of the entire command staff. Her career was over. She went back to her quarters and waited. 45 minutes later, there was a knock on her door. It was Captain Rodriguez, still in his combat gear, dust and sweat covering his face. The route you gave us, he said. It worked. We came up behind them. They never saw us coming. We got our guys out. All of them. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. The wounded? They'll make it. Thanks to you. Rodriguez paused. Price is calling for your court-martial. I know. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, you saved lives tonight. That matters more than rank or protocol. But military justice didn't see it that way. Or at least, it shouldn't have. The next morning, Sarah was preparing for the worst when she was summoned to see Colonel James Bradford, the overall base commander. She had never met him before. She entered his office expecting to be formally charged. Instead, Bradford gestured for her to sit. "I've reviewed what happened last night," he said. "You disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Sarah met his eyes. "Because soldiers were dying, and I knew how to help them. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing." Bradford was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she never expected. "I've also reviewed your service record. Your combat deployments. The commendations from Special Forces teams you've worked with. Lieutenant Mitchell, you're not being charged with anything. Instead, I'm transferring you to a special task force that's being formed. They need officers with your skills and experience." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Sir. The military is changing, Lieutenant. Slowly, but it's changing. We're starting to realize that combat doesn't care about gender. Bullets don't discriminate. And neither should we." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is an opportunity. Don't waste it." That opportunity had been the beginning of Major Sarah Elite Mitchell's legendary career. But as she sat in the coffee shop at Oak Ridge, 18 years later, Sarah knew that the road from that moment to this one had been paved with sacrifice, pain, and losses that still haunted her dreams. The special task force that Colonel Bradford had assigned Sarah to was officially called the Joint Expeditionary Support Unit. Unofficially, everyone called it the testing ground. It was 2010, and the military was slowly, grudgingly beginning to acknowledge that women were already fighting in combat. They just weren't getting credit for it. The task force was an experiment, a way to see how far they could push the boundaries before the official policies changed. Sarah arrived at the unit's base in Virginia to find that she was one of only 3 women among 40 soldiers. The mission was vague: conduct specialized operations in support of regular forces. In practice, it meant they were being trained for everything from direct action raids to sensitive intelligence gathering. The training was brutal. They ran miles every morning in full gear. They practiced room clearing, hostage rescue, combat medicine, and survival skills. They were pushed to their absolute limits, physically and mentally. Many of the men resented the presence of women. They made their feelings known through cold shoulders, dismissive comments, and deliberate exclusion from informal gatherings where important information was often shared. But Sarah had dealt with resentment before. She kept her head down and her performance high. The unit commander was a gruff Army major named Frank Dawson. He was in his late 40s, a veteran of multiple wars, and he had a reputation for being absolutely fair but completely unforgiving of weakness. 3 months into training, Dawson called Sarah into his office. "Mitchell, you're keeping up with the men physically, your tactical skills are sharp, and your mission planning is among the best in the unit." "Thank you, sir. But you have a problem." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Sir. You don't trust anyone. You work alone, you don't ask for help, and you haven't bonded with your team. In special operations, that will get you killed." He was right. Sarah had been so focused on proving she could do everything herself that she had isolated herself. "In 2 weeks, we're doing a major training exercise," Dawson continued. "You'll be team leader for one of the squads. Your performance will determine whether you stay in this unit or get reassigned. Learn to trust your people, Mitchell." That's an order. The training exercise was designed to simulate a hostage rescue in an urban environment. Sarah's team consisted of 5 other soldiers, all men, none of whom seemed thrilled to be led by her. The biggest skeptic was Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, a combat veteran with 3 deployments and an attitude problem. "No offense, ma'am," he said during their first planning session, "but I've been doing this for 10 years. Maybe you should let me take lead on the tactical approach." Sarah looked at him steadily. "I understand you have more experience, Sergeant. That's exactly why I need your input. Talk me through what you think the approach should be." Torres blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "You want my opinion?" I want everyone's opinion. We're a team. I might be the leader, but I'm not stupid enough to think I know everything. Something shifted in the room. The other soldiers exchanged glances. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah did something she had never done before. She let people in. She asked for advice. She admitted when she didn't know something. She listened. And slowly, the team came together.